5 minutes to answer all of that. And as you just heard, the webinar is recorded, and a replay will be available on the YouTube channel of the Covenant of Major Europe, as you said, Thibaut. So for this webinar, we will start, maybe Marion, you can, yes, thank you. The contents of this afternoon. So we will start with an introduction to the budget climate assessment and the framework for climate budget assessment for cities proposed by FOCE, by Marion Feutet and I. Then we will have feedbacks from the City of Paris and the City and Europolis of Strasbourg on this methodology. And after that, a presentation of Oslo's climate budget approach, which is a different methodology. And I would like to thank our speakers who will present their feedback. So we'll have Mrs. Elsa Meskel, project manager for a low carbon city at the City of Paris. Mr. Michael Lux, climate manager at the City of Strasbourg and at the Eurometropolis of Strasbourg. And Mrs. Astrid Lundstad, climate manager at the City of Oslo. So thank you to all of you. And then, as I said, a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So now, budget climate assessment, how to measure city impacts on climate. To start, a few words on the Institute for Climate Economics. As you can see on the screen, I4C is a think tank with expertise on economics and finance, whose mission is to support action against climate change. To say quickly, our main goal is to contribute to the public debate through our applied research, which are all public. I think it's enough for a presentation. And now let's start with our subject, the methodology of budget climate assessment. So the movement was launched on 2017 with the Paris Collaborative on Green Budgeting, an initiative of the OECD with France and Mexico. With this initiative, France carried out its first green budgeting exercise in 2019 with a report by the administration, the Inspection Générale des Finances, with a special report. I4C has supported this publication of the government's first green budgeting by releasing a 360-degree climate assessment on France's state budget. And France indicated its intention to consolidate and perpetuate this practice through the publication of a document annexed to the budget bills, the first time for the 2021 budget. The willingness to engage in green budgeting can also be seen at a territorial level. Local authorities in France have expressed their wish to have a shared framework to analyze their budgets in order to be able to identify what in their budget contributes to and undermines the ecological transition. So I4C co-constructed with 5 French metropolises and cities and with the support of the National Environmental Agency, l'ADEME, and some cities association, the Association of French Mayors, AMF, and the support of EIT Climate Kick, a climate budget assessment framework for local authorities. So You can see on the diap the different partners and the list of the 5 cities and metropolises involved in this co-construction with I4C. The city of Lille, the metropolises of Lille, the metropolises of the Grand Lyon, the city of Paris, and Strasbourg city and Eurometropole. So what's the assessment of local expenditure on climate? The object is to categorize all budget expenditures according to their climate impacts. And the evaluation, the assessment is based not on CO2 quantification, but on climate expertise. So we are based on the EU taxonomy to provide this assessment. A warning, it's the goal is not to compare cities to each other because their competencies, their organization, the budget organization, public services and delegations contracts are different. So the goal is to compare on the time exercise after exercise, year after year, not between two cities. You can pass. What are the benefits of this methodology? The local authority can choose its impact on climate when voting the budget, so it's a key moment for climate action. And the goal is to give the opportunity of elected representative and to local authority services to identify and understand which expenditure is beneficial for the climate, which has a negative impact, to assess the alignment of expenditure with climate goals, to analyze opportunities for redirecting expenditure in alignment with climate goals, and as I said, to monitor developments year on year. The methodology, this tool that can provide co-benefits too. It promotes cross-sectional communications. It gives the opportunity to meet citizens' demands for transparency and for climate action. It can identify climate expenditure for financial sponsors. And sorry, my phone. And in France, it meets a requirement for the label Synergy reference framework, which is part of the European Energy Awards, led by the National Environmental Agency in France, the ADEME. The methodological principles are common to all environmental issues, but I4C developed 2 parts with its own expertise on mitigation, with assessing the impact of the actions of the local authority on greenhouse gas emissions and their potential reduction, and on adaptation. The goal is to assess what extent the local authorities has to consider on the subject of adaptation. There is other issues, other environmental issues, of course, but it has to be developed by other experts. For example, biodiversity, air pollution, social impacts, and so on. The methodology, as I said before, is based on the guidelines of the EU taxonomy, and is aligned with the national reference, France's net zero target by 2050, which has to be adapted, of course, to your own national objectives. So I foresee and its partner make freely available under a Creative Commons license the methodology for climate assessments of community budgets, of local budgets. Here you have on the diap the different resources that are available, an executive summary, the methodology guide, and 2 technical guides on mitigation and adaptations. They are all available in French and in English. There is on the diap some webinars that are presented, which are available in French only. And we will give you the link in the chat. A few words to finish on the process to implement. Two points. The finance department and the sustainable development department or climate department have to be involved together in the exercise to do the assessment. And it needs that the management and officials have to be involved too to take the decisions in order to improve the climate contributions of the local authority. I hand over to Marion for more detailed information on the method.
Yes, thank you, Antoine. So hi, everyone. I will present you some details on the method for mitigation. So first, if we want to see in details what's in the mitigation method, I would like to present the category to assess the climate impacts of a budget. So on the mitigation method, we have developed 5 categories from green to brown. And for every expenditure, the question to ask is, does this expenditure increase or reduce GHG emissions? If it reduces emissions and if it is compatible with a carbon neutral trajectory, then it is categorized as highly favorable for the climate. So for instance, energy retrofit of buildings or developing electric public transport expenditures are categorized as highly favorable. The category quite favorable means that the expenditure reduces emissions, but is insufficient for achieving carbon neutrality, or it presents a risk for lock-in in technology in the long term. Lock-in in a technology in the long term means that the technology is developed and will last for a long time, but this technology is not compatible with a carbon neutral society. For instance, that could be the case for natural gas buses. If the buses use biogas, then they are compatible with a carbon neutral society. But if they continue to use conventional gas, then we will have to face a technology that is non-compatible with a climate objective that France has taken. The category neutral means that the budget line has no significant impact on carbon. That is the case with social and cultural expenditures, for instance. The unfavorable category means that the budget line that we consider is incompatible with carbon neutrality because it generates significant greenhouse gas emissions. And we have developed a fifth category, which is the undefined category. The undefined category means that we have not enough information, the local authority has not enough information to be able to categorize the line. And this means that the local authority has to create data, has to collect feedbacks from the departments for its next assessments to be able to categorize the budget line in the future years. This slide is to show you the decision tree that you can use to categorize the budget line. So as I said, for each line, it is important to ask if the actions is reducing emission or if it is increasing emissions. And you can have a further look on the decision tree in the methodological guide that we will put the link in the chat just after. So how do we decide how the local authority decide in which category is the expenditure? How to decide if the expenditure increases or reduces emissions? To answer this question, the Sustainable Development Department to categorize the expenditure will rely on our method. And in the method, we have built some assumptions. And there are 9 assumptions sorted by sector about building, transport infrastructure, vehicle purchase, roads, food, waste, purchase of energy, IT and new technologies, and about green spaces. And there are also 6 cross-sectional climate issues that are developed in the method about staff expenditures, business trip, climate tax, subsidies, public procurement, and carbon offsetting. And to explain you a bit more what is behind the assumption, I will give you the example of vehicle purchase. So for how do we categorize the line, the expenditure about vehicle purchasing? So the method says that for vehicle purchase, the vehicle purchase is considered as climate friendly if the car emits less than 50 grams of CO2 per kilometer. And this limit of 50 grams comes from the European standard. So as Antoine said, the method is consistent with the EU taxonomy. So that's why we rely on this 50 grams. And if the car emits more than 50 grams, then it is categorized as climate unfriendly. Regarding trucks, buses and scooters or bikes, we look at the motorization. If it is electric or active, then it will be green. And if it is based on fossil, then it will be brown. And you can have a further look about the detail in the methodology. So now you know a bit more on how we categorize the line. And I will show you now the process, because there are many lines in a budget. So the method that we have developed with the cities has developed a process to be quicker, to categorize every line in a quicker way. So the first step is to look at all expenditures, and using the Excel tool that is in the method, and that is based on the French accounting nomenclature, but that you can adapt to your own accounting nomenclature in your country. It is quite easy to know if it is a neutral expenditure or if it is an expenditure that has to be analyzed further in detail. So the first step helps to reduce the number of lines that has to be analyzed in details. And the second step is to look at the expenditure that have to be analyzed and to categorize them thanks to the methodology using the taxonomy. The taxonomy will say if the expenditure is highly or quite favorable or neutral or unfavorable. And if the local authority has not enough information to categorize the expenditure, then it will be categorized as undefined, which is in yellow. So this is some information about the mitigation guide, but we also have developed a guide on adaptation to know how the local authority has taken adaptation issues into account in its climate strategy. This methodology is still to be tested by the cities. That's why it is a method to experiment and develop. So what do we consider in the adaptation guide? I will give you a quick view on this. The method analyzes how the municipality is taking adaptation into account. Is adaptation taken into account wherever it is necessary? The method does not say if it is a good adaptation choice or a bad one. The method does not say if it is sufficient to adapt the city to its own climate risks. So that's why we say that the evaluation, the assessment is based on a process implemented by the local authority, and it is not based on the impact of the adaptation action that are already implemented by the local authority. On the picture, you can see what are the steps, but I will not go today in details about that. So to finish, the last part of this presentation is to show you a bit how what are the recommendations to present the results of a budget climate assessment. Here is an example of the results that you can get from a mitigation assessment. So there is still a part of the budget that is undefined in yellow. And it means that this part of the budget has to be categorized from year to year by the local authority. And it will be done thanks to the feedbacks and thanks to the data that will be created to categorize those expenditures. The unfavorable expenditure in brown have to be questioned by the local authority, especially before voting them. And yes, a key message on this picture is that the goal for the local authority is not to have an entire green budget. But the goal is to question every expenditure, to ask if the expenditure has a positive impact on climate or a negative impact on climate, and if it is possible to mitigate this impact. The expenditure that are tagged as neutral in gray in this budget don't have to become green. And it is normal that there are still some gray expenditures, some neutral expenditures, because there are other objectives than the environmental objective in a local authority budget. So for instance, expenditures on social issues. And we recommend to present the results by commissions to the elected officials. Here is an example to present to the transport committee, for instance. So the results present the impact on climate for mitigation and for adaptation. It gives details about the line. Here you can see what is green or what is brown. So for instance, the cycle and bus lanes are in green, but the highway construction is tagged as brown. And other impacts can also be assessed by the local authority. So like the impacts on air pollution or on biodiversity. But we recommend not to aggregate the criteria. So it means that it is important to separate the impact on carbon neutrality, on adaptation, on air pollution, or on biodiversity. Because if you want to aggregate all these criteria in only one indicator, then it is much more complicated to know what are the impacts of the expenditure. So that can be the case, for instance, for the construction of a train line. It can be tagged as highly favorable for climate on carbon neutrality, but it can have some bad impact on biodiversity. So it is important to separate the criteria to understand what are the different impacts of a budget line. And we recommend also to show the actions that the local authority is doing. This is what you can see in the right of the picture. And because there might be some brown expenditures in the budget, but the local authority can do some action or plan to do some actions to mitigate this in the future, or to question those expenditures. So it is important to communicate about it. And finally, a budget climate assessment gives a global picture of the budget at the time of the assessment. And it is interesting to look at the picture of year after year. And the results will help the decision makers to guide the budget by redirecting the brown expenditures, for instance, or by questioning them. The assessment will also help them to evaluate the green expenditures if they are sufficient to achieve the climate objective that the local authority can have. And the budget climate assessment will help to introduce new dialogues between the services within the local authority. So it will help them to communicate about the climate objective in the local authority. And the results are interesting, but what is even more interesting is to compare the budget color from year to year to see the improvement of the climate contribution of the local authority. So thank you for your attention, and I will leave the floor in a minute to our speakers today. So I kindly ask you to use the chat box to ask your questions. And please, when you do so, indicate your name and your organization if possible. So I will leave the floor to Elsa now, who is project manager for low carbon city at the city of Paris.
Thank you, Maëlle. Hi, everyone. Thank you for offering Paris the opportunity to share our experience of climate assessment of our budgets. So yes, I'm Elsa Musquel from the Environment Department of the City of Paris. Sorry if I don't have the right financial vocabulary, but I try to make it clear for everyone. Before you can switch to the next slide. Before getting into the heart of the matter, I wanted to put the Parisian experience of budget assessment into perspective. the city of Paris has been committed to the fight against climate change for more than 15 years. And by now, Paris is fully committed to carbon neutrality. Emissions have already been decreasing, and through this third opus of Paris Climate Action Plan, you've got the cover on the left of the slide. Through this third opus, we intend to go further. And neutrality requires the extension of green financing. Actually, a wide range of innovative financing tools is needed to attain the goal of becoming a carbon neutral city by 2050. And Paris' strategy to finance the climate plan is based on the development of those new financial tools, but also the search for partners to co-finance innovative projects and the shifting of investment to support the ecological transition. And switch to the next slide. Thank you. So I would like to present you three flagship projects illustrating the strategy in Paris. Paris launched in 2018 a local investment fund called Paris Fonds Vert, gathering public and private investors. Paris Green Fund is a growth fund launched by the City of Paris to support innovative, fast-growing SMEs, offering solutions to accelerate the ecological and environmental transition of Paris and large cities similar to Paris. The City of Paris also financed its climate actions with boroughs via green bonds, which have demanding criteria on the collective projects. And finally, you may know that the City of Paris has for several years now a participatory budget, allowing part of its investment budget to be dedicated to projects proposed but also selected by the citizens themselves. And the climate plan has set a target of 20% of this budget dedicated to initiatives in favor of the climate. So you can go to the next one. To go further with its own budget, the city has decided to work on aligning it with the objective of the climate plan. By initiating the co-construction of the assessment methodology with I4C, and the other French local authorities members of the project. The initial idea for Paris was to work on a better understanding of the coherence of expenditure with reaching goals, climate goals, and not only working on easily identifiable climate expenses, but really working on the entire city budget and analyzing this entire city budget through the lens of climate. It was also a way to work on the demand for transparency from citizens regarding city action. So first, we joined the group to work on the co-construction. Then we had a phase 2 of appropriation of the methodology, testing it on our own budget. And I'd like you to be aware that it is a continuous improvement approach, and we are still learning. Every time we confront the methodology to our budget line, we have new questions. So we keep working with I4C and with the other members of the project, so to get an improvement, a continuous improvement of the methodology and of our results. So I will share with you our experience, but it is the very beginning of this fascinating subject that is climate assessment of budgets. It's in progress right now with the final objective of integrating, let's say, the traditional process of budget construction. We really want to have maybe to add a climate key within the discussion about climate construction, budget construction of the city. So with the strong support of elected officials, and it was really important at the beginning of the project, with strong support of elected officials, and especially 2 deputy mayors, one in charge of climate plan and a second in charge of finance, including green finance in his portfolio, and that's something new with the last mandate. We structured a project team with 3 pillars. We adopted a transversal approach to work on this project, with the participation of finance department and the environment department, which I'm part of, and the coordination of the general secretary. So we can move to the next slide. Once the first version of the methodology was stabilized, we were able to conduct a first assessment on the last financial year for which the accounts were closed. So it was the 2019 administrative accounts. And this first experimentation was conducted by the core team, the project team that I just presented before. We relied on three budget offices of the finance department, each dedicated to a large policy sector. So you can read it: public space and environment, social affairs, or housing, urban and economic development. The specialized analysts were able to provide a higher level of details than what was in line description and that we had in hand with the core team. So the project team launched the process, but relies ultimately on the expertise of operational directions departments to clarify the undefined point that we will talk about just after. And that's the three-circle scheme. The project team, the very inner circle on the scheme, then the specialized budget analyst in the second circle, and representative of operational departments in the last circle. So in the next slide, you will see the results of our what we call first coloring activity. Yeah, here it comes, slowly, but it comes. Okay. And actually, around 80% of the considered expenditure was identified with the carbon impact. So you can see the neutral part, 55%, but then the favorable and unfavorable part. And in the dark gray, it should be yellow to be consistent with what Marion presented just before. But in the gray part here, it is the undefined part. Yeah, thank you very much. This is the undefined part that we have to work. We still have to work on it, and this will need the involvement of operational departments to explain what is behind the line and how we can categorize them. So after this first experiment with the 2019 budget, you can move to the next slide. Thank you. After this first experiment, the City of Paris wished to repeat the exercise as part of the construction of what we call PIM, Programme d'Investissement de Mandature, which is a multi-year investment plan regarding the mandate program. This new application of the methodology is really an opportunity to directly involve the various cities departments in the evaluation of their forecast expenditure. Every department were working on the construction of the consolidation of their forecast expenditure for this PIM just after the election and the renew of the municipal team. So it was really a good opportunity to involve them and explain, let's work together on that methodology so you will understand what is it behind. So we started this program a few months ago, and it's still in progress. Actually, my colleagues are right now working with the culture departments to analyze their budgets. So we are working with half-day workshops, one per department, and it's around 10, maybe 15 now, half-day workshops. For every department, we involve beyond the project team and the sectoral analyst, as we have every time. For every department, we involve also the financial correspondent of the department, who is supported by the operational technical representatives, at least one person, sometimes more, and a sustainable development correspondent when he's available. So before the workshop, we organized a general presentation of the process to the entire network of financial correspondents within the entire city of Paris. So every correspondent in every department was present to this presentation. And we also organized a similar presentation for the sustainable correspondent network. So we had the opportunity to explain the methodology and the objective of carrying this analysis on the city budget. So before the workshop, we also carried out with the project team a pre-analysis following the methodology. So every department has a pre-analysis of its budget. And during the workshop, it is the climate assessment of each investment transaction. So it means that we take the Excel document and we scan every line of the department budget, so we can check if it's okay with the color the team put on the line. We can also clarify the points that could not be analyzed before. And then it's also a way to open the discussion on the different lines and the coloring. After the workshop, of course, there is possible in this work, but for now, what we saw is that workshop Ls were mostly sufficient to conduct these first assessments. So if we move to the next slide, at this point of the presentation, you must have understood that it is an iterative exercise. 2020 was the first year, the test year. So it was the inner circle application by the project team. It was also the opportunity to have a communication to the city, to the Paris City Council. We have an insert integrated in the budget reports to present the process, to present the objectives and the first results on the first budget, the 2019 budget. This year, today, is the year of the precision of the methodology. So we work on reducing the undefined parts. It's also the year where we start thinking about applying the methodology regarding adaptation, climate change, or questioning other subjects. As I presented you, it was the year with the big opportunity to involve really the various departments of the city of Paris with the construction of the PIN. And next year will be the opportunity to consolidate the exercise and repeat the exercise with administrative account, close accounts, but also to work on the very beginning of the construction of budget and the primary budget, so we can get those climate key in the discussion at the very beginning of the process of construction of budgets. So it will be also the first year where we will have sufficient matter to have a yearly based analysis and start comparing year per year the evolution within the Paris budget. So to finish my presentation, yes, the next slide, I'd like to share some lessons learned in the application of the methodology. First, when you will start sort of this exercise, you can be criticized for being biased in the analysis. So having this common climate assessment framework that we co-constructed with I4C was really helpful. And sharing field experience with all the local authorities is always super interesting. But as Antoine mentioned it, this common framework is certainly not a tool for comparison. And you will have a presentation of another French local authority, Strasbourg, with Michael just after me. You cannot compare the raw numbers or the final charts because we do not have the same competencies. And even for the same competencies, we do not have the same management methods or possibilities to act because we do not have the same environmental or even socio-economic context. So we will have to be really careful to clearly explain that point when we will be in a large communication, and it starts today with this webinar. So we have to begin that hard point. Second point is about the analysis lens. The methodology is exclusively based on the climate criterion, and Marion mentioned it. Therefore, it is not intended to be exhaustive, and it enlightens the decision maker on one aspect among others. And we already have questions from elected people, but also from our colleagues in departments regarding integration of other environmental aspects such as biodiversity, air pollution, adaptation to climate change, circular economy, but also social equity. There are big expectations regarding a wider approach of analysis, but GIG is already a big part of it. And let's be clear that it is not a comprehensive assessment of city budget, but is already very rich and especially robust information regarding climate. So as Marion mentioned, it's important to, I think, to separate the impact of GIG, so it's clear that we are analyzing the budget through the GIG lens. And last but not least, budgetary approach is blind to part of the city action. So it may be useful to supplement the results of the budget climate assessment with a list or a presentation or an information of non-budgetary measures implemented by the city or by the local authority, such as regulations or raising awareness operation that are not in the budget lines. In Paris, we are now interested in working on the articulation between this climate assessment of budget and another budget, that is the carbon budget. And I'm very happy to have Oslo today, so I can hear the experience of Oslo on this topic, because we are really now thinking about how to really articulate this assessment of budget with the monitoring of carbon neutrality trajectory for Paris area, and how we have the bridge between the two exercises. But thank you very much. I will stop there, I think, and I leave the floor to the next speaker, that I think is Michael.
Thank you, Elsa. Yes, Michael will go on with this presentation.
Thank you, Marion and Elsa. Hi, everyone. I am Michael Lux. I'm the climate manager in Strasbourg, and I'm very glad to be here. I will show you a few examples because in Strasbourg, I work for two local authorities, the city of Strasbourg and the Eurometropolis of Strasbourg. So I will show you the differences and also examples of budget climate assessments for those two local authorities. First of all, the city of Strasbourg. This is not a very big city, it's less than 300,000 inhabitants. It has its own council and its own budget. As you see, for this year, this global budget is around 500 million euros. The main part of this budget is an operating budget, and I will show you a focus on the capital budget, which is for the city around 130 million euros. And we will show two different kinds of showing a budget for these local authorities of the city. And we also have the first climate plan adopted in more than 12 years ago, and the next one will be voted at the end of this month. So if we focused on the capital budget, 130 million euros for this year. This is a traditional way to show a budget for a city in France. Every city in France has almost the same competencies and powers. And as you see, this is usually a traditional way to show the budget. So you can see the budget is dedicated to education, childhood, green spaces, sports, culture, and and social action. Those are really traditional competencies. And what we did with the I4CE method is to try to give it a climate color. So this climate budget assessment, after the methodology, this is what it looks like. So the same budget, 130 million euros, and this is the results. So you can see most of the expenditures are neutral, and a part of them are green, and a very small part are unfavorable. And we will see later a few examples. So this is the result for the city of Strasbourg. I also work for the Eurometropolis of Strasbourg, the Great Strasbourg, which is in fact the city of Strasbourg and 32 surrounding municipalities. It has around 500,000 inhabitants, and these local authorities have its own council and its own budget, which is different from the city of Strasbourg. So for the global budget for this year will be 1.3 billion euros for the Great Strasbourg. As previously, the main part is dedicated to operating budget, and I will show you two different ways for investment budget, which is 270 million euros. And similar to the city of Strasbourg, we also have a climate plan since 12 years now, and the latest one was voted 2 years ago. So first first way to show the results, to show the budget. This is the traditional budget, and it can be compared to all suburban areas in France. They almost all of these local authorities have the same competencies, and as you see, it deals with economic development, mobility, environment, urban planning and housing, and also health, youth, sport, leisure. This is a traditional way to show our budget. And if we have a look with the I4C method, the same budget is now split into climate colors. And as you see, there is a huge part of neutral expenditures, and this time you've got more spendings that are not climate friendly. So what can be done if we go further? What can be done? I will just focus on the brown area, which is the unfavorable budgets and spendings. On the left part, you've got examples of what's inside the brown color. And on the right part, you've got the possible solutions. And it's not that easy because sometimes you can find real solutions and sometimes not. For example, here are a few examples of unfavorable expenditures. Diesel vehicles. So when you've got such expenditures, it's not really difficult because you can adopt a zero emission vehicle plan, or you can create low emission zones. And by doing those actions, your expenditures will decrease. So the brown part will decrease. For information and digital spendings, here the solution is not that easy because you can buy environmental friendly equipment or work on proper use. But as you have noticed, more and more people are connected, so it's difficult to decrease those kind of spendings and those kind of digital spendings nowadays. Another example is non-recoverable waste that remains an important part of this color. So as a solution, you can increase recycling or develop circular economy. So what we did. So this is the kind of budget that should decrease on the next years. And sometimes it's really difficult to find solutions. For example, one part of our budget is dedicated to our local airport. We've got a small airport, around 2 million passengers each year, but it's still an important part of our budget. And also with public car park, those kind of expenditures are really hard to decrease, and you can't just stop them in order to have a climate neutrality. So it's sometimes solutions is sometimes really difficult to find. So as a conclusion, I would say that this budget climate assessment give us a new pair of glasses in order to watch our budget. So this is the same budget, but this is another way to watch it. And as Elsa said previously, some actions that are now classified as neutral can probably be approved to become greener. And also we also have a work group in order to solve another question is how can we decrease unfavorable spendings. So at the conclusion, there is still a lot to do to align our budget with climate neutrality, but we try and improve.
Thank you, Michael. That was really interesting, both of you. I will leave the floor to Astrid from the city of Oslo to present the Oslo approach of climate budget, which is a bit different from the approach that was presented previously.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you for inviting me to this I must say, really interesting webinar. My name is Astrid Landstad, as you said, and I work for the Climate Agency in the city of Oslo. So I have prepared a presentation about how we have developed the climate budget and how it is an efficient governance system in Oslo. And the climate budget is something different from what you call climate budget assessment. And you could compare it with what you call carbon budget. That's why I turned the climate budget or carbon budget in the title. In Oslo, we see the climate budget as a tool to achieve our climate goals. We have implemented one of the most ambitious climate targets of any capital in the world. Our goals are in line with the Paris Agreement. By 2030, the goal is to reduce the direct emissions of greenhouse gases in Oslo by 95%. In other words, Oslo will be practically a zero emission city by 2030. Nevertheless, even if we reach our emission goal, the climate will continue to change due to the amount of greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere, and also because climate change is a global phenomenon. So therefore, we need to adapt to present and future hazards. Hence, the target of Oslo is also to become a climate resilient city. Next slide. One of the key challenges for reaching the Paris Agreement is the fragmentation of responsibilities between global, national, and local level. And in addition, there are often internal divisions between administrations, between those who think money and those who think emissions. We are taking measures to avoid this fragmentation in Oslo by introducing climate budgets. With the climate budget, we seek to count carbon the way we count money. Just like the financial budget, the climate budget is the responsibility of the deputy mayor for finance in Oslo. And of course, with solid technical support from the climate expertise and the environmental sector in the city administration. Next slide. I think we can just skip this slide about the climate strategy. It just states the same that I said with the climate goals, but also how we have introduced a broader range of climate change related activities. So what is the climate budget? The climate budget, it's the key tool to organize our climate work in Oslo. It's a tool to operationalize our climate goals and the climate strategy on an annual basis. Oslo was, as far as we know, the first city in the world to introduce a climate budget. We used it for the first time in 2017, and we are now developing our 6th budget for 2022. The climate budget is fully integrated in the financial budget process. We are budgeting towards the future by identifying the measures and instruments needed to reach our targets. The emission impact of each measure is estimated, and the responsible unit for implementation is identified. The budget then clearly states what has to be done, what is the goals, by whom, and when, and at what cost. I want to emphasize that a climate budget can be developed in many forms. This is pioneering work, and we are continuously working to improve the methodology in Oslo as we gain more experience and knowledge. So the next slide. Oslo's measures address all the scopes from 1 to 3. So here you can see the scopes. And we are working on reducing both our direct emissions and our entire footprint. With that said, it's important to keep them separate in measurement and accounting. And therefore, in the climate budget, we only focus on direct emissions, scope 1. Next slide. The first step in developing a climate budget is to define the system boundaries for the climate budget. And there are many ways to do this. You can, for example, develop a climate budget for the city administration, or the city as a geographical unit. It all depends on what data, knowledge, and resources you have available. In Oslo, we have decided to develop a climate budget that covers the emissions from the city as city of Oslo as a geographical area. And it includes all emission sectors in available statistics and in the inventory made from the Norwegian Environmental Agency. And it contains a combination of national, regional, and also local measures. And also a combination of quantified and non-quantified measures. And the next slide. Before you develop a climate budget, you have to know the historical greenhouse gas emissions for the city. Here you can see the greenhouse gas inventory for Oslo, developed by the Norwegian Environment Agency. They have developed statistics for all municipalities in Norway with the same methodology as the greenhouse gas inventory from the IPCC 2006 guidelines. And it contains 9 emission sectors and 38 emission sources. So the next slide, when you know how when you know your historical data, you can set up a climate budget. And here is the framework for the Oslo's climate budget in 2021. The green line shows the historical statistics, and the green dotted line shows a projection of emissions in Oslo. The red dots are our climate goals, and the yellow line shows our annual target. As you can see, the projection clearly demonstrates that business as usual will not lead to our ambitious targets. So therefore, the next slide. Yes, therefore we have to implement measures to reach our goals. And here's the climate budget. Yeah, and the next slide. And here is the climate budget for Oslo in 2021. For each annual budget, the measures are analyzed towards the target area and also estimated. And we aggregate all the measurements. As you can see, the light green dotted line shows the result of all the measures in the budget. And as you also can see, we will achieve a reduction in emissions of 30% by 2023. And that shows us that we still have a way to go to reach our target of 52%. So more actions are needed. We need to find more measures to reach our targets. Then you can take the next slide. I want to tell you a bit about how you can develop a climate budget and how we have developed it in Oslo. So first, I will tell you a bit about the governance structure in Oslo. In Oslo, the city finance department, in close cooperation with the Environment and Transport Department, manages the climate budget process. However, all the departments are encouraged to propose measures in the budget and to be responsible entities for implementation and of the measures. The Climate Agency provides expert advice on the climate budget. The Climate Agency is the agency where I work. We also provide advice and knowledge when it comes to implementing and also reporting on the measures in the climate budget. And the next slide shows the budget cycle in Oslo. The climate budget is published and decided upon as an integral part of the annual budget. The same budget logic applies to the climate budget as to the financial budget. You cannot decide to use more than you have available. And the next slide. What makes the climate budget an efficient governance system is that the units that are responsible for the measures have to report on result indicators 3 times a year. In that way, we can follow up all the measures and adjust the course if we see that some measures or instruments don't deliver the assumed emission reductions. And as the official emission inventory for Oslo are published with 1.5 year delay, we have developed the climate barometer to track trends. It is a collection of indicators on the development in activity within the different sectors. The indicators are tracking the measures and instruments, for example, through examining vehicle passing through the toll ring and the rate of transition towards the private and commercial electric vehicles. These indicators are updated 3 times a year, and the results are published at our website, which you can see here on the slide. Yes, so I have some concluding points and lessons learned from our work in Oslo with climate budgets. You can see some concluding points on the slide, and I also want to say that when you work with the climate budgets, there will always be uncertainties, and we have to continuously work to further develop the technical side of the climate budget and how we estimate the measures. It's important not to be accused of cheating with numbers, and therefore transparency is the key. We also find communication efforts valuable, and also collaboration is the key. So we collaborate with the city administration and also with other cities and municipalities. Last, our experience is that as long as we are transparent, climate politics can be directed through the climate budget. We do not have all the answers, but with the climate budget, we are able to give advice to our decision makers with greater certainty. And here you see the next slide. I want to promote the C40 projects on climate budgeting, which are starting right now, actually, as we speak. The C40 office in Oslo are forming a pilot of several C40 cities who are or are going to develop climate budgets. And they will discuss methodology and guide each other in the climate budget work. So if you are interested, you should get in touch with the C40 office in Oslo. And these C40 projects are similar to the Norwegian project on climate budgeting, where Oslo and 2 other cities guided 6 other cities and regions in their work with climate budgets. And based on that, on the experiences from these cities, we developed a guideline on how to make a climate budget. And on this slide, you can see a picture of the climate budget climate assessment methodology of Oslo. So we have Oslo has also developed a methodology for climate budget assessment, quite similar to the I4CE methodology. So last autumn in 2020, our consultant group developed this methodology on how to assess the climate impact of the budget. It is based on experiences from the I4CE methodology, and it consists of several steps to assess the budget's impact on both direct emissions and indirect emissions, and adaptation. And right now we are testing the methodology on parts of the budget. And the next step is to consider to implement it as a tool in the whole organization. So maybe we will have the same methodology in Oslo next year. Not sure yet. So with this picture, a lot of people not knowing about Corona. This was before Corona in the city center of Oslo. Summer and sunny and yeah, nice. And with this picture, I will say thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Astrid. Thank you for all your presentation. And I wanted maybe to ask you, Astrid, before we go to the question from the audience, why have you considered to implement the budget climate assessment approach in addition to the climate budget or carbon budget approach that you have developed in Oslo?
That is because we want to have an overview of all the climate work in the city and how all our activities are, how it impacts the climate. And also have an overview of what kind of activity are developing more emissions. So then we can do it in another way. So that's why, actually.
Thank you. Mikael or Elsa, do you want to react to the presentation of Astrid, and what main differences do you see with the budget climate assessment approach do you see, or do you consider maybe to do the carbon budget that Oslo presents, as you said, Elsa or Mikael?
Yes, I have a question for Astrid. Thank you very much for your presentation. It concerns monitoring and reporting. I'm curious about it because everybody knows climate change, but nobody speaks CO2. So I'm really interested in the way you report and the way you communicate, because together we speak and we talk about 3 scopes, but citizen wants concrete action. So I'm curious to hear you about communication and reporting.
Yeah, so the climate budget contains only scope 1, and it's based on the inventory that Norwegian Environment Agency develops. So then we use the same methodology to estimate the measures and aggregate them, and then we have a result, and we can show that, okay, and present for our politicians that we are reducing the emissions with this much. We have so much more to do to reach our targets. And 3 times a year, the entities that are responsible for the measures have to report on indicators that are result indicators that are linked to the measures. So it could be different kind of indicators, but they are linked to the measures. So it's, and the reporting is linked to the financial budget process. It's a part of the reporting process for the budget, the financial budget.
May I ask also a question to Astrid? I'd like to know, you mentioned non-measurable actions or measures, and you also mentioned actions at a supra level, I mean region, national actions or measures, international actions. I would be very interested to understand how you integrate those non-measurable actions and also those supra-level actions in the communication, and how do you explain the articulation with the city action?
So I presented for you this projection line, how the emission will develop if we are not doing anything more, if we are not taking more measures into action. And this projection line contains also measures from regional and national level. So the toll ring in Oslo, it's a national and regional and local measure. So that's all the emission reduction linked to this measure is you find in the projection line. And it's the same with some measures that we are implementing now, like national and regional measures. Then we will implement them into the projection line.
Thank you. So we have some question in the chat box. One question: is it possible to have a simple and standard approach, standard method to first approach about the climate assessments about the budget of a French city? Antoine, do you want to answer?
Yes, it is the main goal of our methodology co-construct with 5 cities. It's indeed 5 big cities that are have tested the methodology, but also the methodology has been tested by 5 large cities and metropolises. It is possible to carry out the evaluation on the basis of these methods, regardless of the level of the authority, of the local authority, and the size of the local authority. For example, we have feedbacks from some small or medium cities in France, such as Béton in Bretagne, that have tested the methodology, and so we can make the links between you and the city of Béton, for example.
So if you are interested in getting an approach, just give us your email and we will come back to you.
Another question was from Eva Reichsteiner, a question about maybe the word neutral in our diaps. Some of your graphs indicated that the budget was quite high for climate neutral actions, but often climate neutral actions are much more expensive than activities with a high CO2 emissions. For example, train tickets are often more expensive than plane tickets. Maybe a term confusion about neutral in our graphs. Mario, what do you think?
Yes, so neutral in our graph was about action that are non-significant for climate impact, on climate impact, which means that they are not increasing emissions or reducing GHG emissions. That's why we said that those actions were neutral, and it was not about carbon neutrality. So activities that are neutral in our graph are not activities that are reducing emissions. There are activities that have no impact on climate, or at least no significant impact on climate. So to be clearer.
We're coming to the end of this webinar. Maybe we have time for a last question, maybe. If not, so I have to, yes, Emma Bonin, thank you. So this is a question for for Oslo, did you set a limit of emissions by sector or general one? Astrid?
It's a general target. So we will be a zero emission city by 2030. And this is a general target.
Great. Thank you, Astrid. So thank you all for your participation. A big thank you to our three speakers and to the Covenant of Mayors Europe for this opportunity to present all of this work on the local budget climate assessment or carbon budget in the framework of the EU Green Week. I give you back the mic, Thibaut, if you want to conclude.
Yeah. Before closing the webinar, thank you very much to all the participants and the speakers, and on behalf of the Covenant of Mayors. This webinar will be available on the different channels on YouTube and on the Covenant website. We'll share as well some a quick article including the main takeaways of these webinars, and I just shared finally a link to a survey, and I will ask all the participants to answer this very quick survey to collect and evaluate this webinar and collect your feedbacks and suggestions on this. It will take less than 2 minutes and will help us to improve our future events. So thanks a lot for this, and have a nice end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Have a nice day. Thank you.